Well, it's been quite a while since I've gone in front of the camera, and now it's April, toward the end of April 2024. And I thought I would sort of put the camera in a different location and kind of get rid of some of the stands that are in my office area so that I actually can walk on the floor in here. It seems like it's very, very cluttered with books and all kinds of things. But anyway, that's kind of the rationale that I've used to kind of set up this new deal where if you could see the camera right now, it's sitting on a tall stack of books. But the point is this: I thought I would start a new series, maybe again putting my face in front of the camera from time to time, and just sort of share some musings, some ramblings, some reflections, whatever you want to say, regarding the Buddha Dharma. And so I thought to begin with, I would talk a little bit about the Lotus Sutra, and particularly the notion of skillful means. Anybody that's spent any time on my channel knows that I have deep reverence for the Lotus Sutra, in spite of the fact that my own belief system and tradition and doctrinal adherence is to the Jodo Shinshu or Shin Buddhist approach to Buddhism or tradition. That I don't restrict myself, or if you want to think of it as it's my karmic destiny, if you will, to still have an interest in the broader range of Mahayana scriptures, and in particular the Lotus Sutra. Of course, the Prajnaparamita is wonderful, and all these different scriptures and sutras in the Mahayana are wonderful. But what makes them wonderful in one sense? What makes them wonderful is embedded within Chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, which is the notion of skillful means. And why is this such an important notion or concept within Buddhism? It's because it gives the Mahayana or great vehicle Buddhist tradition a universality that is rare in expressions of spirituality or religion within this earth of ours, within this Saha world. I thought I had kind of obtained a copy and read at least the most important parts of all the different translations of the Lotus Sutra. But recently a friend of mine on YouTube, and now we correspond also by email, he turned me on to the fact that there was one that he discovered that I had not heard of. And it was by a translator called J.C. Cleary. And what he did was he translated up through chapter 24 of the Lotus, which of course includes chapter 2, which covers the topic that I'm going to speak about today, namely skillful means. I want to read a little bit from his introduction, which will give a more global idea of what this notion is. And then I may wander into some of my own musings as regards skillful means, or sometimes it's called expedient means, or provisional teachings, or tactfulness. In the translation of the Lotus Sutra that I first got very, very deeply involved in, it was called tactfulness. In the sense that the Buddha, again, I think the primary function of the Buddha is teaching. So the question, how does the Buddha teach? And also, more fundamentally, why did the Buddha come into the world? These are questions that are very worth pondering and that are addressed directly within many of the Mahayana scriptures. So anyway, Cleary says, the Lotus Sutra repeatedly describes the basic methodology of the teaching of enlightenment, which is known as skill in means. Guided by the principle of skill in means, real Buddhist teaching does not follow any simple formula. It does not establish a set of doctrines that must be accepted as absolute truth by its adherents. It does not define itself in terms of a specific set of rules, rituals, texts, beliefs, commandments, or sacred scriptures. From a Buddhist point of view, a dogmatic approach to religion can only be another example of delusions in action. You know, it's hard to emphasize how profound that kind of teaching is, because it's natural for us as human beings, particularly in the context of our pondering our own mortality and death, and also in the context of our thinking mind, which wants to have answers to the questions of, frankly, some of the questions that the Buddha, the historical Buddha, didn't want to answer in terms of, what is the nature of our life? Will we continue to live after we die? What's the real nature of reality? These things can't be answered with concepts, because reality at the end of the day is non-dual. It's beyond our ability, literally beyond our biological, physiological, functional capability to articulate with the kind of creations that occur as a result of our thinking mind. So how could any doctrine express the ultimate truth in full, complete form? It can't. And this notion within the chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra makes that point explicitly. Cleary goes on to say in his introduction, he says, "The Buddhist observation is that there is no single formulation that can encompass the totality of truth, no uniform technique that can lead everyone everywhere to realization. True teaching is what is conducive to progress toward enlightenment in the context of a specific situation, audience, and moment in time. The teaching that works for you today might not be the teaching that worked for someone else yesterday. It takes the insight of the enlightened teacher to adjust the teaching to the needs of the particular person being taught, just as it takes the skill of the physician to prescribe medicine that will cure the sickness of the particular patient." And doesn't that really make sense? I mean, each of us is brought up in a different culture. Each of us is exposed to different ideas related to spirituality and related to everything else, or at least most other things. And so how could we rationally come to the conclusion that one particular human culture developed a religious ideology or doctrine that expressed the ultimate truth in such a way that it was applicable to every human being on earth? Now, at a 30,000 foot level, maybe so, if we talk in terms of what is the nature of the mystical experience that can be expressed in various doctrinal terms. But as far as a specific doctrine expressing truth in a way that is universally applicable, it doesn't make any sense, at least to me. And so that is why this is such an attractive teaching. He says, "The enlightened teachers designed their work with this in view. They knew that it is entirely possible for a particular concept or story or practice to help people in one community at a certain moment in history to wake up to their real situation, to act more compassionately, become more generous, and make spiritual progress, while in another context, with another community, that very same concept or story or practice could become an idol or an obsession, reinforcing their delusions and leading them to spiritual stagnation." And I would take that a step further, and not only in relation to a given community, but in relation to a given person. This is tied in with a belief I have, is that I think that even when you have a group of people or a community within a particular, let's say, denomination of Christianity or tradition within the Buddhist schools, that you can have a doctrine, and I think it's good to be affiliated with a community of believers, a sangha, that believe broadly in a certain doctrine. But if you were to poll these people as individuals, each one would have a kind of a nuanced, different idea or view of that basic doctrine. At least that's my premise. And so again, if we think of Buddha at the Sambhogakaya or bliss body level, the spiritual, cosmic level, as being the great teacher, he or she or they teach us as in accordance with our own individual personalities, our own individual spiritual needs, is how I think of it. And therefore we develop our own slightly idiosyncratic approach to how we view other power and the the cosmic realm of spirituality. He says, this is why the wisdom traditions have often changed shape over time as they adapted to changing circumstances in the human community. This adaptive change, this skill in means, is the hallmark of real wisdom active in the world. So if their mission is to teach, those who have arrived at the reality must be able to read the patterns of belief and action of the people around them, understand how people perceive and how they think, and then devise strategies to open them up to truth. These strategies, taken as a whole, form the Buddhist teaching as it unfolds in practice. This is the idea of skill in means. And again, coming back to the Lotus Sutra, he says, the Lotus Sutra returns to this central theme again and again. It illustrates this process extending through past, present, and future as the enlightened teachers operate using skill and means according to the needs of each given time and place. In the words of the sutra, the enlightened teachers employ, quote, countless expedient means, all kinds of causes and conditions, comparisons, metaphors, terminologies, in order to set forth the teachings for the sake of living beings. These teachings are all the one journey to enlightenment. Thus do all living beings, hearing the teachings from enlightened beings, ultimately attain all knowledge, close quote. And this author is interpreting one vehicle as being one journey, and that relates, of course, to the three vehicles versus the one vehicle, which is another very important theme in the Lotus. And when it's talking about the one vehicle, again, it's not talking about that there's one doctrinal approach that everybody needs to adopt. He's talking about the fact that the goal, and this is true for Buddhists, I think, all Buddhists, is that the goal is to become a Buddha. The goal is not to stop short in some intermediate kind of spiritual attainment status, if you will. And yet, of course, the paradox is that, there is nothing to attain. There is no Dharma. There is no doctrine that one must adhere to, because the nature of reality is beyond all doctrine, beyond all dualism. And so then Cleary goes on to say, despite the diversity of expedient means adapted by the enlightened teachers, they are all serving the same purpose, as the Buddha explains. And here's where I'll get back to the notion of what was the Buddha's reason for coming into the world. Why did the Dharmakaya, or law body that is beyond all words and concepts, manifest itself in the context of the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, the bliss body and the form body? Quote, this is from the sutra, this is his translation of this very, very important portion of chapter 2. He says, quote, and this is the Buddha speaking, all the enlightened ones, or Buddhas, have appeared in the world for the sake of one great cause. All the enlightened ones have appeared in the world in order to enable living beings to open up their enlightened perception and attain purity. They have appeared in the world because they wanted to show the enlightened perception of the Buddhas to living beings. They have appeared in the world because they wanted to enable living beings to awaken to the enlightened perception of the Buddhas. They have appeared in the world because they wanted to enable living beings to enter upon the path to the enlightened perception of the Buddhas. This is what it means to say that all the enlightened ones have appeared in the world for the sake of one great cause. And then Cleary goes on in his introduction to say, for the enlightened ones themselves, the great teaching mission goes on forever in an endless variety of forms. Absolute truth is one and all pervasive. The teaching of truth takes on concrete forms in response to what is necessary in various circumstances. As the Lotus Sutra puts it, quote, this truth rests in the abode of truth and always abides amid worldly forms. Once they have come to know this truth at the sight of enlightenment, the true teachers explain it with expedient means. Close quote. So that that is all I'll say for now about this concept. But if any of you have not been exposed to the Lotus Sutra in general, and to Chapter 2 in particular, I encourage you to do so. And the various parables in the first sections of the Lotus Sutra reinforce this notion, help us to understand how, for example, the Buddha, in the context of him being the great teacher, can be thought of as raining the rain of the law, raining the rain of the teachings upon the various bushes and trees and grasses within the earth, and that each one takes in what they need in accordance with what's required for their own growth. And so may this rambling of a foolish bamboo be one or two drops of rain as it flows maybe from the Buddha through me to you, my friends, in the context of your own journey, your own search for truth as a seeker within whatever spiritual tradition resonates and makes sense to you. And again, from my Shin Buddhist perspective, I say, Namandabs, Namandabs, Namandabs.